Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info. And first of all, to my American viewers out there, happy 4th of July. And to my Canadian viewers, a happy belated Canada Day. Summer weekend here. We're not going to keep the show too long today, which, certainly want to make sure you guys have a chance to celebrate the 4th out there. Here on the West Coast, it's not quite fireworks time, but I know it's going to get close to it on that. So we'll probably do a little bit of a shorter show here today. We'll still do the trivia segment and everything and go from there. So just coming in to the show today, conclusion of the Cup Series race today. The first road course race at Road America for the Cup Series since 1956. Junior Johnson was the last place finisher and Tim Flock the race winner back then. This time around, Chase Elliott, your race winner, and Ryan Preece, unofficially your last place finisher. A big thank you to everyone who participated in the last car giveaway here. I had a couple of extra Richard Petty merchandise that I picked up over at the Texas Motor Speedway during our trip there a couple weeks ago. So congratulations to Michael who won that drawing there. We'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Also got a couple other things I'm going to be sending out to some Patreon members here as well in the days ahead. So a lot of exciting things with that too. As we continue on from here. A bit of an unusual race in some senses. Certainly in for Road America, I think the biggest concern everybody had coming into it was this going to be a suitable substitute for not having the Daytona race on the same weekend. Obviously, we had the switch with Indianapolis and such before, the Indy road course and the Brickyard not really being a suitable fit there. But if this is a more comfortable fit in this sense, certainly from the audience, much like we saw at Pocono last week, I think it was a fantastic spectator venue. And NBC, I would say much more than Fox, quite honestly, has done a great job of making these tracks look like really exciting places to go to. Even in Nashville before that, I thought they did a good job of showing that, there's a really great fan base out there. I really like that Collinsworth guy out there that's doing the man in the stands thing. I make fun of that a lot because I think the other person that did it, didn't really do much for it. But this guy here, if he's actually doing the whole buffet Benny thing, sitting in the canopies there and eating the brats and everything like that, does a great job of really marketing the track and making it seem really exciting to check out. So kudos to him there. I think that's a good pickup there on the group. But yeah, I mean, really, heat exhaustion seems like that's been a big subject of this. You could tell really from the end of this Cup race in particular that they were just mechanically, the cars were wearing out, tires wearing out, and drivers even wearing out. They pointed out Kurt Busch having his hand out the window, trying to catch some air at the same time. Real difficult situation. Whatever race you're going to have on the 4th of July, you're going to have that issue one way or the other. There was kind of a solution there, having the Daytona 400-mile race, the Firecracker 400, running it at night certainly helps to a certain extent. It certainly did in Texas when we were there for the All-Star race in June. But it's a different situation there with that. I thought it was a really interesting scenario there. I thought it was a good, a good venue. I mean, it looked like fun. It looked inviting. Our correspondent, William Saki, that's actually his home track, and he actually provided a great picture of, I think it was Sam Mayer's car after the incident in the Xfinity Series race yesterday. So kudos to him for sending the picture there on that. Got that posted in the article yesterday. But really interesting venue. I think it's worth at least kind of shaking it up a little bit. I like Daytona in July, but I also not really crazy about all the rain delays there. Obviously, moving into August has its share of problems too, given the severity of hurricane season. And I know that there's already, I guess the news reports already about trying to predict the trajectory of the next one going through there. So certainly hoping that things are for the best out in that region. But it's going to be interesting kind of going forward. But I think if they probably at least stick to this at least next year too, and maybe the weather is a little bit better. Although in July, I think that's a lot to ask. It seems like it's a good venue. The patriotic aspect was certainly there. A lot of fans turning up to it. It seemed like a very relaxed atmosphere. I've never been to it myself. We need to start doing some Midwest races when we start kind of doing some more of these races out of venue here. Look it up. But that may be one I'll look at. It looked interesting. It seems like this is definitely a track that it's challenging. I think probably more so than most of the tracks, just because of the track's overall length, to track actually anything that's happening on the track. Certainly the actual pit strategy, I basically just gave up on following that after the first stage. It just seemed like everybody was on a completely different cycle. And then by the time we got to the third stage, everyone's just kind of hanging on and at least being within their fuel window. But that was about it. A few surprises along the way, though. Kyle Larson dropping back, certainly after the incident with Bowman, and then seeming to continue to drop back. I think he was 16th or 17th at the finish, was certainly surprising. But Hendrick's dominance of the season continuing. Chase Elliott getting the victory unofficially pending post-race inspection. Bowman being in the mix there as well, despite the incident there. And William Byron was good at the beginning of the race. Unfortunately, dropped back after that spin that he had. I don't know what happened with the car there, but that's kind of what I was about to say. A lot of issues that certain drivers would have. It seems like it's really hard to track what's happening from one moment to the next. I think this is a race that really would have benefited from the use of the actual race view function, where you can actually follow any driver in the field and see the intervals and try to understand things that way. I think with the limited access that you have these days, it's really not as easy to do that. I would have been very interested to find out what was going on at the back of the field with guys like Eversley and the other Tilley that were getting in there. It seemed like Tilley was really struggling at the start of the race in the 78, even before he ran off track into the gravel trap in the carousel. He locked them up after the Ryan Preece incident there, too. It seemed like they had real problems with the braking zones, despite the fact that they had practiced in qualifying. But that would have been interesting to see. I mean, hopefully, maybe I'm still hanging on to my old race view scanner and stuff from the track. I guess the track view of it, the track pass one or whatever. So I'm hoping somebody else buys up the rights to it and brings it back again, because I thought that was a fantastic help to the at track experience. And then of course still hoping up that they bring something back for personal home use as well. But I think this is a track that definitely would have benefited from that, because I think otherwise I can't imagine how challenging it must be to cover this race in person. The accesses to the garage area I thought was interesting too, that there's that one entrance that Suarez was pushed into before the last corner. And then of course the other one that both Eversley and Preece used, the rear entrance at turn 5, the corner that everybody kept overshooting. It seems like it would be really tricky. I definitely have to lace up the old sneakers there to track anybody coming into the garage area for that event. But again, I think kudos generally to the broadcast. I was pretty pleased with the broadcast in general, a little bit more than the race itself. Again, the race I found very difficult to follow in terms of strategy and who was up there. It seemed like people just kind of ended up in the lead rather than actually making any big moves or big strategies. Kyle Busch seemed like he had the car to beat. And Matt DiBenedetto had one of his best overall runs that we've seen, even since Talladega. A great run that he had out there, ultimately getting the 10th spot, I believe, in the unofficial results. And Kyle Larson being up there a bit, but a little bit off, not to the same extent that we saw him at Coda or Sears Point or other tracks beyond that point. A little bit of chinks in the armor there, that it's not quite working out there for the number 5. And maybe that doesn't augur necessarily well for Atlanta next week, where Larson was so close to winning back in the spring before Ryan Blaney got around him at the end. It could be very much a toss-up in that sense. So we're going to find out. But, I mean, generally, again, I think it's in terms of having a race, it's maybe a bit shorter. Although this one was pretty long. I mean, 62 laps of Road America at a track as long as it is. That's definitely plenty of action there. I think it probably would have benefited if they started it earlier in the day. That was another thing that worked out well with the Firecracker 400. Back when it was a day race, they had to start it earlier in the day. I think there was a great segment the E-Racer group put together with their sim race this week that kind of summarized that up with Doug Richard, Dale Jr., and others. And that's definitely something that maybe they'd have to look at there to start a bit earlier. Although at the same time, I mean, if it has a relaxed kind of, atmosphere, kind of a picnic atmosphere, certainly seemed to look like for the crowd, that kind of lends itself to maybe having a race later in the day. But if the race is longer than the 400 was, then you're still going to extend into a hot part of the day no matter what. So it might just be unavoidable. But cool to see him back at the track. And I'm glad that they were actually making a big thing out of the fact that they last ran here in 1956. I thought that was going to be a detail they were just going to completely ignore and pretend that this was an inaugural race, period. So kudos to them on the research. Again, these are things that I'm not sure if Fox would have really done. And I was noticing much more during this broadcast, the very special things that NBC was doing. Camera work was really good. As much as I really like the camera work that Fox had at Sears Point, I think they closed out strong by putting together a great job with their drone camera and everything. It's the only time that worked. I think that NBC should have had something like that in this race, again, to kind of get a better sense of where everybody is, especially when things get fanned out. They did a good job close to it. I love the helicopter review of the track to really get a sense of the actual track elevation changes and where the corners are. One thing that's always tricky with all these new road courses coming in here is trying to find very clear signposts or guideposts of where on the track you are. We've had Sears Point and Watkins Glen for so long, you can pretty much recognize any of those turns from the moment that you see it. A lot of these other tracks, whether it's the Charlotte Roval or the Daytona Infield course, Indianapolis coming up, I think it's a lot trickier. Certainly writing these articles, it gets tricky because I'd like to be able to say, oh, this happened in turn 15 or turn 18. It's just going to require more studying on my part to just actually get a good firm grip on that. But yeah, again, I think it was entertaining. I think it was maybe not the most competitive race, but I wouldn't say it was a bad race either. And I think that NASCAR showed some restraint with the cautions, not at the beginning so much. That incident with Kyle Tilley didn't need to be basically as long of a caution as it turned out to be, especially since it coincided with the end of stage one. That really drug that out. But I like that when dirt got kicked up on the track or there's a tire carcass, and I believe it was turn 13, I'm glad they didn't throw any cautions for that. So there's some positives to take from it for sure. Is it a work in progress? Certainly. I do think that the cautions at the end of the stages still screw up these races. I think one of the best things about road courses is having a decent strategy from the beginning to the end of the race. And when you have these stage cautions, it just messes things up. If you have to have stage points, just award them like the halfway challenge, like we've talked about a lot on this show, and just make it set up that way without throwing a caution. The race just keeps going. So, again, hopefully something works out on that end, but that's something that NASCAR really needs to reevaluate. If they're going to take advantage of this hard reset with the next gen car, perhaps they could slide that into the rule book as well and just say, well, at road courses, this can be a little different, especially with road courses now taking up a much larger part of the schedule. This is a problem that could particularly add up a lot, especially if we get some road courses in the playoffs and you have a lot of those races under caution there. So there's definitely that. Thank you, Athletic Geek, for your super chat here. Chase always seems to win first races on new road courses. Very good point. I mean, you hadn't thought of that, but yes, certainly COTA, the Charlotte Roval, well, not the first, but very close to the first, winning there. Great runs there. And he was right on Kyle Larson's heels at Sears Point earlier this year. We were covering that. And when Larson had any bit of a problem here today, Chase was able to just leap right on that. And once he had that big lead, he was just as unstoppable as he usually is at some of these tracks once he kind of gets a decent gap there. So kudos to him on that. All right. Let me look at the results here again. Not a good day for a lot of the new organizations in the sport here. Of course, we mentioned Kyle Tilley with the Live Fast Motorsports team. Ended up further back in the order, showing in the 35th spot. The first car actually off the lead lap, though, so kudos to him on that. If there had been a caution, he would have got one of those 2 laps back and been in the 35th spot there. Quinn Houff still finishing on the lead lap, 123 seconds back in the lead. But again, the lap's so long at this track that you had that situation. Mentioning the other teams there, of course, the problems for Daniel Suarez, frustrating turn of events. Same transmission issue that they had at COTA, needed to get a push. Took a very long time to get back to pit road because just like at COTA, it happened at a bad spot on the track. But just like at COTA, the Trackhouse team determined to get that car back out there and ultimately did avoid finishing last for the second time this year. I don't know how close they followed the site. The only time that we've had a chance to really write about them in a last place context was back over at the Open race when they had the tangle with Eric Jones. So, interesting situation from there. But again, at the last place spot, Ryan Preece in a backup car, engine failure sent him off the track at turn 5 and then into the garage area. Early day for him. Not much radio traffic there after that point. I thought it was still a transmission problem after what happened with Suarez. especially when he was saying that he was trying to get a push. But apparently, yes, it sounded like engine trouble, at least from the official transcript or the official radio transmissions during the race. The other new team there, 2311 Racing, Bubba Wallace, unfortunately with the transmission change after some issues in qualifying, further back in the order. It looked like he was trying to work some strategy to get up the rankings there. But where did he actually finish at the end here? Back in the 24th spot. So again, Bubba struggled on these road courses here. He had a great bounce back at Sears Point a couple weeks ago. It was a great turnaround for him here. Unfortunately, not the same situation this time around. We'll see what happens in Atlanta. I think both Suarez and Wallace were decent in the Atlanta race this past spring. It's going to be a very different situation, though, with the heat and a very long 500-mile event coming up on that. I think that's going to be a real challenge for a lot of these competitors. We already saw a lot of exhaustion, if I remember correctly, back in the spring race. So, again, it's going to be a real issue where we have from there. Looking at better runs here, Corey LaJoie spun out, ends up in the 21st spot. He was going to be on the way to a top 20 there, it looked like in the early stages. Unfortunately, that issue with Austin Dillon cost him a lot of track position here. Great job by Ricky Stenhouse Jr. getting in the 12th spot, bouncing back from 2 last-place finishes, I believe, in the last 3 or 4 races. So a good turnaround for the 47, especially with his teammates struggling in this one. Great run for him. Matt DiBenedetto, we talked about him leading several laps, looking like he was going to just kind of hang on to it there for a bit, even with some issues there in the early laps, but finishing in the 10th spot there. Ross Chastain, again, continuing his great runs this year, picking up where he left off a couple weeks ago after a difficult week in Pocono, finishing in the 7th position. Chase Briscoe, one of the best overall runs, finally able to cash it in, unlike the issues he had with his brake lines getting ripped out back in Nashville. This time finishing in the 6th spot here. Great turnaround for him. Kurt Busch has been looking really good. I mean, hanging on and now gapping Chris Buescher for that last spot in the top 16. And with runs like he had today, despite running off course himself, finishing in the 4th spot, despite all the uncertainty that's going on with Trackhouse and the acquisition of Chip Ganassi Racing. We'll certainly talk about that as well, though it's pretty late news at this point. Definitely showing that it's not too much of a distraction. They're not able to get some good runs out there, whether they're auditioning or they know something that we don't about who's going where. That's going to be interesting to find out. But Chase Elliott, again, your winner. Daniel Suarez, after the transmission issue, had managed to pass 4 cars, including Austin Cindric, who looked like he was very much on his way towards at least as good of a run as he had at COTA. Unfortunately, the car was not quite ready for him here and had a mechanical issue that sent him behind the wall, of course. And, of course, right after posting a tweet there saying that he was on rails, I'll tell you what, Age Tweets is probably going to have to start owing me some royalties here pretty soon because I'm getting a lot of their content. A lot of their content's going to be just most of my tweets there right before something happens. So we'll find out what's happening with that. But, a crazy situation with that. Michael McDowell was my pick for this race. I thought he was going to do a lot better than he did. Unfortunately, stoved in the nose at one point. Had a pit stop at the end. Probably would have worked out well if he had a caution at the end. But as it stands, finished in the 30th spot there. So not a good points day on that end. Not a good points day for Kevin Harvick either. The momentum that he picked up at Nashville in the Gravedigger car has not continued into this race. Finishing 27th wasn't really a factor the entire day. In fact, his teammate, Eric Almirola, seemed to be the only Stewart-Haas car that was actually really kind of doing anything out there, at least contending for any top spot at one point or another. And Almirola, given his difficult season this year, that's certainly the case. Josh Bilicki, a very quiet 23rd place finish. Decent bounce back after the frustrations of getting involved in that incident at the end of the Xfinity race driving for SS Green Light Racing. The Screaming Sicilian car in the number 52, very distinctive looking paint scheme out there. Good to see that he had a good run, and especially at his home track. And really, again, some of the competitors he finished ahead of: Bubba Wallace, Kevin Harvick, and Michael McDowell, William Byron, Suarez, so many other competitors here. I don't think if everybody had that in their fantasy lineup there, but a decent run for him there as well, especially for the Rick Ware effort. Not something you typically see too often there. Athletic Geek, thank you for your other super chat. Yes, won the first Daytona Road Course Cup race as well. Exactly. There's another good example. He's just able to just kind of crank out these road course races. Kyle Larson is really kind of put his foot into the ring here with how good he's been on all these tracks and then getting that Sears Point race. But you can't overlook Chase in these races, and Chase certainly served notice about that today, even in extreme weather conditions, whether it's heavy rain at Coda or extreme heat in this race, still able to pull off a victory in that sense. In this case, not even with the race that was rain shortened. So kudos again to him on that. Thank you to Beast of Metal for your super chat as well, or the end to the beginning of the race. Well, again, I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to on here. Let's see. On the end of the beginning of the race, it kind of feels, I guess in some sense there, you kind of have a situation where, the the race felt awfully long in that sense. If that's what you're addressing there, I'd certainly agree. 62 laps around here. I wasn't sure how that was entirely going to feel, but it was enough that for a second there, you kind of get lulled into the momentum of the race in that sense. So there was that too. Let's see. Yeah. If you're talking about stage points too, I mean, again, if you just have points at the end of the race, that would make sense also. I mean, the stage point thing is going to be endlessly controversial, and the way they've handled it, I don't think has been the most interesting way they could have handled it. But again, that's a whole other situation there too. Is Atlanta a night race? I'm not sure. I got to look up the results on that. If it's a day, I mean, if it's a day race, that would be just way too intense. Now, we saw a bit of that last year where they had to make up all those races during the pandemic and then crammed them all together on 4 and 5 race weekends in the summer. And even when they had like the Martinsville race in June, and even with that being a night race, it was still, heat was a big issue. I guess it's always been something that these teams are trying to avoid, but that would be the situation here. Let me take a look here. No, Atlanta chose 3:30 p.m. Eastern. So I mean, if it starts noon over here, then it's earlier in the day here, but it's not. At least the first part of it is going to be at a pretty hot part of the day, late afternoon, early evening race. I mean, if it's 3:30 for the start of the broadcast, that's there. So yeah, not really a full on night race. We're not doing a 5 o'clock Eastern start. So at 3:30. For the start of the broadcast, I would assume the start would be between 3:30 and 4 or thereabouts. Certainly the start of that race, especially in the first stage, I think is going to be really interesting here. And then, of course, we got Loudon before the break for the Olympics coming up. So that's going to be another story there along the same route there. Oh, I got you, Beast of Metal. Yeah, working the strategy at the end of the race. Yeah, sorry, man, that went over my head there, I'm afraid. But I appreciate it though. But that's certainly, again, you bring up a good point though. I mean, the strategy of road course races used to be counted backwards. You had Jeff Bodine pioneering that at Watkins Glen in '96, and you just don't see that anymore. And then again, if nowadays you have to kind of flip that back again the other way, and you're starting from the pit strategy at the beginning. It's just not the same experience. It's not to say it's always been like it was in '96. Of course, it wasn't before. But again, there's other ways that teams can look at it, and maybe again something that can be re-examined further down the line. Feel like Ross Chastain was racing for his job today. Certainly possible, Biff Gregel. Like certainly the way that he was performing out there, and again, the great runs he's had on the road courses. It shouldn't be as much of a surprise now. But again, if we get to the Indianapolis road course, maybe we'll see him actually turn things around. Maybe a combination of the fact that Ganassi did so well, even with Matt Kenseth last year, having pretty much the only good run he had in the 42 after taking over for Kyle Larson. The fact that that 42 did well in Indianapolis and maybe break through winning at the Indy road course, certainly stranger things have happened. But we'll find out. Certainly the rest of this year is going to be interesting to see. Yeah, it's disappointing that DiBenedetto couldn't quite pull it off. It seemed like he was really kind of working something out there on the 21 car. I thought he was just kind of just taking it easy and not doing anything too crazy. Although it seemed like around the time Cindric spun out, there were concerns that he had something wrong with the car. I don't know what exactly that was about because he seemed to come out of pit road just fine and work his way back up there. But 10th place finish, still something they could take, but obviously they're still going for that 100th win at the Wood Brothers. And, I don't know if it's going to happen in Atlanta or New Hampshire before this break the next couple weeks. But it'll certainly be another story to keep following as we reach the conclusion of the season here. Let's see. So let me go back to the Xfinity Series race here. We'll talk about that as well. The Henry 180 won by Kyle Busch. Who cares? Second place, Daniel Hemrick. Second place, yet again, Michael Annett, a very impressive run in the third spot there. That was good to see. Really like the paint job, too. There's a nice trend. I think Spire Motorsports, and even before that, of course, Furniture Row Racing kind of started this, where teams were running kind of flat-colored schemes instead of kind of a glossy look. And so with some of these primary colors in particular, like on Annett's car, it looks really nice. Spire Motorsports has done that this year with a lot of the schemes that Justin Haley and Corey LaJoie have run. And I think they make really nice paint schemes. I don't know how well they translate onto diecast, because a lot of times diecast has that glossy look to it. But going to be very pleased with the design job on that. The JR Motorsports cars don't always have the best looking rides, but I think in this case, that was certainly a good case. AJ Allmendinger and Harrison Burton rounding out the top five. Your last place finisher, Spencer Papelli, the road course ace, multi-time starter at the 24 Hours of Daytona, among his other accolades, making his second start, his first since Coda, in the Xfinity Series, driving the number 6 that we typically see both Landon Castle and, of course, lately Ryan Vargas running. Unfortunately, Papelli's car had a transmission issue after sliding off into the gravel, even worse than Kyle Tilley did today. Apparently, according to tweets that he posted, Papelli had so much gravel in there that it was actually in the transmission tunnel, so they had to actually kind of clean that out completely. Finally got him back out there about 10 or 15 laps down. I go down and grab something to eat. By the time I come up here, he's back into the wall after losing the front brakes, going into a corner and backing into the fence. Glad he was able to climb out okay. But unfortunately, these are those situations where a driver tries to get the car back out there, the team working as hard as they could. And again, kudos to the JD Motorsports team for working as hard as they have. I've been able to talk with a couple of the crew members there during some of our trackside coverage there. And they're a good group of people over there, very hard workers. And that was certainly shown again with the situation with Papelli. Unfortunately, ended up with a tore-up car there after that incident and a last-place finish. Came within just a couple of laps of dropping Sam Mayer to last after Mayer had that very scary accident getting turned in traffic. Mayer would have finished last if Papelli's accident happened even a lap or maybe 2 laps later, but unfortunately it wasn't meant to be, and that ends up being the story that was posted just yesterday. Jay Buford, another great qualifying run like he's had at Nashville and some of these other tracks. Unfortunately, another bad finish here. Buford ending up at the 34th spot there with suspension issues. Ty Gibbs, your pole sitter, had a transmission failure in about the same spot as Suarez did today. Ty Gibbs drops back to the 33rd spot. Natalie Decker rounding out the bottom 5 after Decker was in the last spot for a lot of the early laps, about 10 seconds off the pace of the next car in front of her. Unfortunately eliminated in an accident towards the end with Chris Wright, Ryan Sieg, and some others there. Unfortunate situation on that end. Some surprising runs at the same time. Timmy Hill doing a great job in the 20th spot there. First actual start of the year for the number 42 car. So that was certainly good to see. Tommy Joe Martins with a 15th place finish. Great performance for him. Brandon Brown in the 11th spot. Again, several good runs, even just a bit further back. Preston Pardis keeping going in the 16th spot. That's almost a disappointing run for him. He's always been so good in the Spec Miata series and these handful of road course starts that he's made. He's certainly one to watch one time to the next, and an outside chance of getting some top 10s. Almost saw it back at the Daytona road course this year. And I believe at the Roval last year, he was right in the thick of things too. So that'll be interesting to see coming up. Kaz Gralla, his first start of the year, fishing in the 18th spot for Jordan Anderson's team. Good to see there. Ryan Sieg, unfortunately, involved in that one incident drop back. Myatt Snyder had a good run going. Cody Ware was in the top 10 for a bit and dropped back along with his teammate Josh Bilicki. You mentioned Bilicki earlier, the incident that he had in that one corner there. And apparently, I think it was a sway bar that broke on it, dropping him back to the 29th spot there at the finish for Bilicki. Brett Moffatt seems like he's kind of hit the skids lately in the 0-2. The Hour Motorsports team has been so accustomed to being a pretty good fixture for, if not a top 10, very close to it. And then suddenly these last few races, it seems like the 0-2 has had just as many problems here as the 23 has had. They're going to have to find a way to kind of recover here in these next couple of rounds. Maybe the off couple of weeks here is going to be a helpful effort for Chris Hour's effort as much as anybody else's. Let's see. But again, decent Xfinity race. I still kind of miss when that race was a little bit longer. We had 50 laps. Although in that case here, Kyle Busch seemed to have the field so covered, it probably wouldn't have changed the outcome there. But again, coming back from that spin that he had, and kudos to him for managing to miss the inside wall or the outside wall after that. What was that? Justin Allgaier got into him there. Good recovery on that sense. Surprising though, I think that was the other kind of big story from a lot of these races this weekend is who was and who was not getting serious damage to their splitters. It seemed like in some cases, like Kyle Busch in Cup Series practice, Ryan Preece in, I believe, qualifying, anybody out there, or I guess it was practice for Preece also, sometimes just a wheel off there would be enough to cause really serious damage there. Or, I guess in Kyle Busch's case, he actually spun out and hit the wall. But what causes a lot of damage and what doesn't? We saw Denny Hamlin off course many times today, still had a somewhat decent finish there, despite kicking up some dirt. Then you have a situation where Spencer Papelli gets off in the gravel, and he's just in the garage area for multiple laps. You have other situations. Kyle Busch's spin didn't dig the splitter in. You have other cases where it does. So it's interesting. I don't know if the teams have gotten better at figuring out a way to make sure the splitter stays in place and doesn't damage it, if they actually have additional reinforcement or not, or if it's just dumb luck. If they just hit these particular spots where either the grass isn't as thick or as wet or whatever the situation is. There was an interesting variety of that this weekend because going off in the grass was certain doom for some drivers and not really a big deal for others. And it'd be interesting to find out what the difference is. It didn't seem to correlate necessarily with manufacturer. But certainly, I would imagine the higher end teams are able to kind of manage it more than the lower end teams. And that makes me think that maybe there's some kind of change going on with that. Because it seemed like they were kind of hitting the same spots. There were a couple of spots that were real trouble spots. I know Road America did a good job of actually repaving sections so when cars ran wide, they didn't immediately rip the nose off the cars. So kudos to them on that. But yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, Kyle Busch. So again, Kyle, and Kyle's got how many more Xfinity races this year? Or is that his last one? He's like right in the mix there. I guess I think they said it was the fourth or fifth, 5 this year, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we'll find out how all that shakes out. Again, we're looking to do our trackside coverage again. For those of you relatively new to the group here, we're going to do Las Vegas at the end of September, and then the championship finale at Phoenix in November. That is the remaining schedule for this year. So again, we're pretty much good on summer venues and venues that are too much further outside of a drive. We're going to do rental cars for both of those events. So that'll make that a bit more affordable and be able to cover those. Big thanks to those of you in the Patreon for all your support on that. I was able to post some more content on here, and I have other ideas for stuff to come up here in the near future. We had our first Australian follower of the Patreon, so kudos to him. I have some other material that I'm kind of working on that. Some other plans coming up for the fall. Of course, including the next episode of Rise of the Field Fillers, episode 8 on Andy Belmont. I don't have a date set on that yet. I'm still juggling that with a couple other things. So we'll kind of get that going. But again, thank you for everybody for your support on that. We're very close to our next level in the Patreon here. So those of you who are big Starting Grid fans, once we reach our next level, and there's details on there, patreon.com/LastCarOnRock. Once we hit that level, we'll be able to have all our Patreon members vote on which race I do, which is a Cup, Xfinity, or Truck Series race for now between this weekend and the end of the year. And that'll be the next one there. We already had one back at Bristol for the dirt track race. And I'll be interested to see what people are interested in me doing going forward there. So I got stopped by Stephen Parsons and Brad Perez in Texas about the starting grids. And the good news is that we're pretty close to that there as well. So thank you for that at the same time there. Thank you for the super chat, Beast of Metal, there as well. I feel like we're seeing the beginnings of a long expected changing of the guard amongst the owners between Gordon's elevated role at Hendrick Motorsports and now Ganassi cashing out and Trackhouse taking over his team. Very good point. And it's a good transition into talking about the Trackhouse thing. I know I haven't, other than Twitter, I haven't really, I've tweeted plenty about it, but I haven't really spoken about it here on one of these shows. So I'll certainly do that here for this next part. I think Beast of Metal is right on the ball here. I think there is a new generation of team owners coming in here. And although the Trackhouse team in 2311 were getting most of the attention, it is something kind of larger going on. A lot of the older team owners are getting older. And, whether it's Jack Roush or Roger Penske or Rick Hendrick or Joe Gibbs. And we've seen some changes going on behind the scenes along the way. Some of them have been smaller changes. Some of them have been much larger changes. This may be the trend going forward. I still think what's troubling is the fact that we're getting a lot of mergers here at the same time, because that makes me think back to 2007. That makes me think back to Bobby Ginn. That makes me think to the trend into 2009 when you suddenly didn't have 43 full-time teams. And it's, again, not to say that the number of teams that are capable of getting full-time sponsors or sponsoring most of their races has, ebbed and flowed constantly. It really has. And as I expressed in the first episode of Rise of the Field Fillers, it's always been a constant cycle from one moment to the next. I do think that, and I do stand by what I said the other day, that one thing that the charter team, the system has failed to do is protect these other legacy teams being in here. And I do believe that that's a major intent of this. And I don't think it's just my belief. There's other articles that were talking about this. The big thing with the charter system, and it's easy to forget about this because it's been a few years, was to reward teams that had a long time investment in the sport, and in hopes that they would be able to continue to have a long time investment in the sport in the future. It wants to make sure that they're staying in the sport. Just because they have an option where they now have another asset that they could cash out if things get bad, it's not designed for them to fail. It's not structured in such a way, at least it wasn't marketed this way. It wasn't marketed as a way to say, oh, well, hey, you've been in this sport a long time. You need to get out. Here's a golden parachute so you can cash out and leave the team. Now, maybe some teams will do that, but I don't think that was the idea. Otherwise, they would have just given charters to everybody, and everybody that had an active team, even if they were a part-time effort. The idea was to reward teams that were going to attempt the entire season and make sure they had guaranteed spots, because if they had guaranteed spots, at least in theory, they were going to be able to market themselves to sponsors easier, because the sponsors would then know, okay, if I sponsor this team for X number of races, I know they're going to qualify for those X number of races. So my company is going to get seen. Now, that presumes a lot of other issues on the other side of it here, where the TV networks don't show the entire field. They don't show the field in the starting lineups. They don't show the fields during the race. And some of those chartered teams are in that same group where they just don't get seen that often. How many shots did you see of Cody Ware's car today? Not too many, but that's a chartered entry. So it's one of those kind of situations. So again, it does have this other feature where you can cash out your team, but it's not encouraging you to. It's just saying that if you need to, it's going to be, you're not just going to be just selling parts off of, the garage and the parts that you have for pennies on the dollar, which has been the case for a lot of the sport's history. Drivers like JD McDuffie wouldn't have been able to stay in the sport as long as they had if it weren't for shop auctions. JD was going to shop auctions right up to his last race in 91. So this is not anything new in that sense. But again, it was intended to reward teams that had an interest in long-time investment in the sport. Now, very interesting thing about that is that even at that early stage, that wasn't necessarily true, because the Wood brothers weren't given a charter because arbitrarily they said that they didn't run a full-time season, and that was enough to disqualify them. Even though that if they had a charter, that probably would have made them marketable for a full-time season if they chose to do so. So that was one of the first major criticisms of the charter that gets forgotten, because, of course, now they're a chartered team because all these ones have been bought and sold since then. We also have a situation now where At the same time, NASCAR is saying, okay, well, the other thing is too, we want to make sure these teams are in good standing, which means they don't want starting parks. Even though starting parks had already kind of worked themselves out in 2015 before the charter system started. And even teams like Phil Parsons Racing were actually running full races, even with limited sponsorship. Yet they weren't eligible for charters at that point, and ultimately had to merge and combine with other teams that did have charters. This is where you get Premium Motorsports. This is where you get Rick Ware Racing. This is where you get other organizations in there. They're very much a creature of what NASCAR allowed to happen through the Race Team Alliance's suggestion of this charter system. So again, when you have a situation here this week, it did turn out to be advantageous for Chip Ganassi that he was able to sell his team to Trackhouse and bring an organization in that is already getting more and more investors. I mean, you got Tony Robbins in there as well as Pitbull, and getting that whole effort together there. I mean, kudos to them. The problem is that a team has to do this. A team now has to buy a charter from another team in order to expand their operation. You just saw it with Matt Collig putting out the money to get 2 charters themselves, and how much that shuffled things already, even for Trackhouse. So when the option then becomes to buy an entire team, it's not to say that that's, again, unheard of. As I mentioned in the Bobby Ginn video, there used to be a lot of times where somebody would buy a single car team. We're in a different league now. Now people are buying multi-car teams. If Trackhouse is buying a 2-car team, it's not the same thing as Jack Birmingham investing in Eel River Racing. It's not the same thing as Jim Matei investing in Jeff Bodine's team. It's a whole different world. It's much closer to the Bobby Ginn thing. And where the Bobby Ginn situation comes up is we have to really be concerned in these situations when more and more of these charters are owned by fewer and fewer people. Are these team owners, do these team owners have an interest in staying in the sport a long time? Now, I think from every indication, Justin Marks and Pitbull and Tony Robbins have every indication of staying in the sport. They've been putting a ton of effort out there to promote their team, and I hope that they continue to do so. I'll be very interested to see which driver they do hire. But again, even in the best case scenario here, we are talking about 2 cars in the place of 3. That the fact that the charter was lost from the 99, and then they get 2 charters just to keep the 99 going and to expand the car 1 more. And then the Colleague team getting 2 charters to strip 1 away from the 99. This constant shell game going on. The same game that's also kept JR Motorsports out of the hunt of getting a charter. When it keeps Dale Jr. out of the sport, investing into a Cup Series team, I think that by itself should probably raise some questions from people along the way. So that's a problematic one. I don't want to be a wet blanket about this because I am excited for Trackhouse. And I do think, as Beast of Metal said, that we are entering a time where we're getting different team owners and different team owners involved in the sport. We've already seen so many changes in the drivers that are in the field. It seems like team changes are much slower. The charter system has tried to kind of slow that progress down. It hasn't encouraged competition. It's been another barrier to it because when you're investing, it's not simply just buying cars from another team or building a shop or anything like that. Now you got this other thing you have to acquire just to make yourself supposedly marketable to sponsors. It used to be that you didn't have to do something like that. Didn't have to make an extra investment, but now that you have to. And so you have a situation where, teams are having, teams maybe that are struggling, maybe want to cash out. In this case, it wasn't really that situation with Ganassi. In this one, he was just given an offer he couldn't refuse. And that's, in business, these things happen. So that's where I think a lot of people aren't as upset about this particular case. And of course, Trackhouse's star is on the rise. I've talked about them plenty on this show too. But again, the fact that Trackhouse had the need to buy a 2-car team, that should be a little bit troubling, I think. I think that, again, if it becomes a point where we're just buying and selling these things, it really makes you wonder what the value of that thing is. And it's it may just be a seller's market right now, and the price is just going up, and you got to pay $10 million just to get one. And that's just what we're hearing about. There's probably other trades that are costing much more, and there's no oversight. It's just completely, it's kind of bizarre. If we're having the equivalent of saying, oh, we want to keep you in the sport, so here's this charter that's going to make you stay in the sport and make it sure that you get a sponsor that's going to stay with you. And then on the other side, it's just raw capitalism here. And it's like, okay, well, here, let me shell out the money for that. And there's no oversight in how much it costs. Again, it's always left a bad taste in my mouth because I think it's just a contradiction. And it questions why it exists to begin with. Teams shut down, teams open and close all the time. And, I think that at the top end of the field, it's created stagnation from organizations that are not going to be in any danger of shutting down anytime soon. I mean, what does Hendrick need with their charters? They're not going to have any trouble getting sponsors for Chase Elliott or anybody like that. What does Joe Gibbs need their charters for? What's the point of that for them? They're not in any interest in that. And who's going to try to buy Joe Gibbs out of the sport? It probably will happen someplace further down the line, like it happened with Ganassi. Back in 2001, it probably would have been unimaginable that Ganassi would sell out because he had the big Dodge deal back then. And then Sterling Marlin was ultimately one of the best, if not the best Dodge driver of that movement. But it's tricky how that all works out. And that's kind of the situation with that. So, that's kind of where I am. I'm kind of losing my train of thought on this, but it's just absurd though, at the same time there. And I hate it for teams like Trackhouse because it's not something that they need to be worrying about right now. They should just focus on their on-track performance and get an organization that can grow as best as it can. Now, fortunately, they had the money for it, but imagine if a team didn't. Again, the JR Motorsports example in that case. So, that's a different situation on that. So, yeah, very bizarre situation, but hopefully, we'll see more what happens with the dust settling here. I'm happy that it's worked out well for Ganassi. He's done a great job in the sport. He helped out Felix Sabates there when they were struggling after the tragedies of the 2000 when they lost Kenny Irwin, and bringing on Jason Leffler in 2001 and the sponsorship that they had and the great runs they had at the beginning there. All the moments they had with Juan Montoya and Jamie McMurray and so many other competitors out there. It's sad when you lose a team out there, and it's especially sad when it is something like this. I mean, where it's just, again, given an offer they can't refuse, rather than, oh, well, we just can't get sponsors anymore, we're going to sell our equipment and all that. It's not really a better option. It's still kind of distasteful, and that's kind of the unfortunate part. And again, it's nothing against Ganassi. He can't help it. I mean, he's a businessman. You got to do what makes sense for your business and everything from there. But it's just unfortunate. And it would be nice to have it both ways. That you still had 2 Trackhouse cars and 2 Ganassi cars next year instead of, just 2 Trackhouse cars and no Ganassi cars. I still think that we're going to reach a point here where it's not always going to be a seller's market. And you're going to have charters just kind of lying on the ground there and not enough cars to fill the field, because you're not going to have as many open cars because they're getting starvation wages just to be able to compete out there. And then you got other people that aren't able to afford to buy them, or they just buy them for pennies on the dollar, and then they get out there. It's a temperamental market. You want to talk about cryptocurrency being temperamental? I think these charters are another one. And we'll probably see a crash at some point because, again, you look at the history of the sport and the economics of it, and it's always been like this. It's never been straight. It's not a gradual rise. Yes, even when the sport was exploding in popularity, there were teams that were getting squeezed out, whether it was owner drivers, whether it was independents, whether it was anybody else. We saw that in 2004 at a time with the field fillers thing too. You didn't realize how many teams were getting squeezed out until suddenly there's not enough cars out there, and then who do they call? I don't think we're out of a situation that we could have that at some point again. And they're trying to, and again, like I talked about in before here, NASCAR likes to make sure that they legislate ways for things to happen, even if those things are something that's out of their control. If it's something out of their control, they still try to control it. And this is another example of that with the charter system. And I think they're going to find that again, in the not too distant future, you'll probably get another lull there. And suddenly you'll just have maybe 3 or 4 charters lying on the ground and nobody can afford to even put together cars. Then they're going to have a real situation. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I do think it's within the possibility if there's no regulation on these charters. And I think instead of placing regulations on there and doing the typical NASCAR solution of adding rules on top of rules, just get rid of them. Because what point do they serve at that point? You want to bring new people in. Well, you're going to have to make sure that other people get into the sport. And maybe, one thing I was thinking of the other day was maybe there should be another option of a way to get a charter, to earn a charter through performance. Maybe if you're a part-time team and you get like a couple top 20 finishes or something like that, maybe that puts you on the fast track to earning a charter. Maybe at that point you're a 37th charter instead of just being 36. Maybe there's 41 starters instead of 40. Maybe the field allows a spot for you in the field based on that. I think that would be much more palatable than the business model that's in place. And I think people would have less of a problem with it, with people like, Rick Ware's team or Carl, well, not Carl Long's team, but Rick Ware's team picking up charters there because just nobody else is using them. So, again, that's kind of a lot on that. But, that's definitely been something I've been chewing over this whole week there with the Trackhouse thing. Because there are a lot of positives. I don't want to make it sound like this is, the worst thing that's ever happened. It's far from it. But I do think it's yet another exhibit in the ongoing case against charters that needs to be looked at a little bit more closely. And I think that if that moment's going to happen, it's probably still not happening now, but I hope the conversation is at least out there. And I was encouraged by a lot of the responses on Twitter the other day. I think the debates were very civilized, and everybody was very cool about it there. And I appreciated the discussion on it. So, and those of you watching this video after the chat here, I certainly invite your comments on this too as well. So we're kind of going from there. So let me go into this here. So, oh gosh, we're already up to about an hour. I was going to just do a 1 hour show here, but we'll wrap up with some trivia here in the meantime. So we'll go ahead and jump into our trivia segment here. If you have any other questions about, the action this week or any other news stories from this past week, definitely mention it in the chat here and I'll get to it. In the meantime, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. This is the late 90s Trivial Pursuit device. So some of the questions will be a little bit out of date, but others will be very timely, or timeless. So we'll find out what answers we can get on this. So again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Okay. Yeah, sounds like a bubble. Exactly, Jonathan. Yeah, that's exactly what I think it is. And again, especially with the finite number of them, they're trying to manage the scarcity of it. And yeah, the demand is increasing because they're seeing what Michael Jordan's doing, they're seeing what Pitbull's doing, they're seeing what even Team Live Fast are doing. These organizations are getting something started. But the dirty little secret is you could have done this a few years ago. It's not like the sport is so much more open now than it used to be. You could actually have started a team a few years ago and got cars from another team. Now you're in a situation where you have to get brand new cars next year. And you're going to be in a very difficult situation like we were in 2013 and 2008, where one or two of the legacy teams, your Hendricks and your Gibbs, they're going to figure it out first. And you're going to be racing for about 21st, if at best. So that's going to be the really difficult situation. I think that, and that's the other frustrating thing with the charters, is it provides the illusion that the sport is open to new team ownership now than it used to be, when that's clearly not the case. You could just, heck, there was a time, even not too much. I mean, we're not at a time now where you can soap numbers on a door of a car at a used car lot, strap the doors shut with belts and tape the headlights up and just send it out there. Clearly, we're not. But we are still in a time that, at least we were, that you could get cars from somebody else and run them out there. But the cars are running now, they're going to be immediately out of date by November. And it's going to be, a tough deal trying to hit the reset button for the third time in 13 years. That's pretty dramatic. And that's been a huge expense on these teams. And you could probably see a clear separation between how many teams we have now and how many teams we did have in 2007 before the car of tomorrow came in. And it's unfortunate. And I know some of it's done in safety, and that's certainly extremely important. And there's been a lot of positives to draw from it. But these several changes, the fact that we now have multiple generations of cars since then, that makes it really tricky. So that's the situation. All right. So tracks leads at 4. Wild card and tracks. Sorry, thank you for keeping track of that beast of metal. All right. So let's see. We got wild card, we got teams, got all that. Okay, where are we on that? Wild card and tracks still tied at 4. So maybe we'll see what we can figure out with this here. Okay, so maybe we'll go and do some wild card questions here. All right, and this is what I'm going to do also as well. In honor, this wasn't entirely planned, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here, and especially for those of you that are staying in here on the 4th of July, a little thing to throw in here too. With the news of Trackhouse being merged with Chip Ganassi Racing, I actually have another giveaway that we'll do for one of these questions here today. I picked up this Trackhouse hat over at Sears Point. They got a good deal with it with the shirts they had there, and this does not fit my bowling ball head at all. So I would be happy. I mean, if you guys don't mind, it's only been worn once. It's not all it's not all sweated through or anything like that. But I would be happy to send it to one of you guys here if you guys are interested. So if you want to, hopefully it fits one of you guys better than it does me. I wear like a 5, 7, and 8 of 5, 7, 8 size hat, like a large, extra large for a flex fit hat. So these plastic ones here, they just don't do the trick for me here. So, but I don't want it to go to waste. I don't want it to just sit in the box somewhere or something. So one of these questions tonight, I'll let you know beforehand. Whoever's the first one to have the right answer, I'm going to send this to one of you guys here too. So a little extra bonus for 4th of July here. So we'll get to that in a little bit here too. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think we're tied on wild card and tracks. We'll do a wild card question to start off. Maybe we'll do some tracks along the way here. And if it seems like it's a really good question, we'll do that for the hat. I'll let you know which one that will be here. So first question, what former NASCAR Winston Cup champ was program director at Charlotte in 1960? Don't look it up. Go ahead and guess. I'll go ahead and read that again. What former NASCAR Winston Cup champ was program director at Charlotte in 1960? Colleagues drivers next year, it got Haley for the full-time ride, if I remember correctly. And I think Allmendinger was going to share the second car. That was the last I remembered hearing. What former NASCAR Winston Cup champ was program director at Charlotte in 1960? I guess it's for Tim Flock, Wheeler, Fireball, Rex White, Red Farmer, Red Byron. That says Tim Flock, Curtis Turner. Okay, let's find out. What former NASCAR Winston Cup champ was program director at Charlotte in 1960? And your dad is right, Blake. It is Tim Flock. Tim Flock is the correct answer. Charles Peterson, I think you were the first one on that. Maserati 9. Eric Batten. Gordon Burris. No, you had Red Byron. Hang on. Blake Thiemann. And Blake Thiemann Sr. there. Yep. Tim Flock indeed. Next question. All right. Okay. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's a tricky one. What driver is also known as the Tasmanian Devil? Before you type it out, think about this thing is late 90s. So think about who it might not be. But this is actually the question. What driver is also known as the Tasmanian Devil? Your father's name is Mark. Well, Mark did a good job. Kudos to you, man. He was absolutely correct. What driver is also known as the Tasmanian Devil? All right, we got Dick Johnson. We got Jimmy Spencer, Marcus Ambrose, Dale Earnhardt. Yeah, I'm going to let this one sit. Don't look it up. Go ahead and just try to guess. No, nothing wrong with the wrong answer here. This one isn't the hat question yet. I'll make sure you let you know that beforehand. What driver is also known as the Tasmanian Devil? I think I actually know the answer to this one, but we'll see. Rusty Wallace, Robert Presley. All right, Mark says Ricky Rudd. Okay. It's Dale. Okay. All righty, here we go. What driver is also known as the Tasmanian Devil? The answer is Derek Cope. Derek Cope. Look at that. Oh, it went right into focus. Perfect. How about that? I have heard that, actually, in my interviews for the book. Yeah. Maybe not what you would expect, but yeah. Derek Cope. Yeah. Yeah. That was actually the question. I should have made that the hack question, but probably nobody would have got that one right. Yeah, Derek Cope. Always good to have a good Derek Cope question on here. This thing's fun with that. We still haven't reached the absolute limits of this, I think. All righty. What need to hear the story behind that one? Well, yeah, that's coming up. That's coming up. What NASCAR Winston Cup driver's dad was chief steward for the IndyCar series? What NASCAR Winston Cup driver's dad was chief steward for the IndyCar series? That's our next question. Yeah, there's gonna be a story behind that one. What NASCAR Winston Cup driver's dad was chief steward for the IndyCar series? All right, get guesses for Dallenbach, AJ Foyt, John Andretti. Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that. That was a tricky one. Yeah, see, you learn something new every day. All right, we got several guesses for Dallenbach, and the answer is indeed Wally Dallenbach. Okay. Okay. All right. So, in interest of keeping the show without it being too long here, this one is going to be the hat question. So, this one here is for the Trackhouse hat. It does not have the tags on it, but it was, I can assure you, it was only worn once, and it does not fit my head. So, if you want this one here, and if you do believe that they will win, this question is going to be the hat question. So, we'll do that. All righty. And it's going to be a number. So get your fingers ready on this. This will be a fast finger question here for that, which is probably appropriate for this. All righty. Now don't look it up. Here we go. Okay. Question is, how old was Lee Petty when he first began racing? How old was Lee Petty when he first began racing? For the hat, go ahead and type in the chat right now. It was not I would assume. How old was Lee Petty when he first began racing? I'll wait for a few more of these to come in here before we do the answer. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in here. We'll probably just do one or two more questions here and then wrap up for the night here because it's getting on towards 7 o'clock Eastern here, and we definitely want to make sure you guys can enjoy your 4th of July. I appreciate you spending a little bit of your time with me while I ramble on about charters and road courses, but we'll do maybe a longer show next week for Atlanta here after the holiday. All right, Mark says 40. Okay, here we go. How old was Lee Petty when he first began racing? All right, I think we got a good selection here. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing more answers pop up. Hopefully that means I didn't lose connection here. All righty, the answer for the hat is 35. 35, Maserati 9, first person to guess. You got it right away, man. Well, Maserati 9, congratulations. You are the winner of the hat here. So I don't know if I have your mailing address, but if you'd like, you can go ahead and DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open on that, so you can drop me a message on that. So we'll get that out to you this week. All right, 35. 35 is indeed the correct answer. I was going to guess younger. I was almost thinking that he would have started younger like Richard did, but that was not the case. So a lot of you guys were pretty close to the number on that. So there you go. So yeah, Maserati 9, you can either DM me on Twitter or you can email me. All my contact stuff's on the page there, of course. So you can drop that. We'll do a couple more questions here. We saw, what was it? Trax was the second one here. Was Trax the other option that had a lot of votes? Okay, we'll do a couple Trax questions and then we'll wrap up the show here today. Hang on. Good. Okay. Here we go. Okay. We'll do a couple Trax questions to wrap up the show for tonight. This question: what two brothers had a highly publicized collision at the first Brickyard 400? What two brothers had a highly publicized collision at the first Brickyard 400? What two brothers had a highly publicized collision at the first Brickyard 400? Our guesses for Bodine, Jeff and Brett Bodine. Bodine's Rusty and Kenny. And a lot of you got it. It is indeed the Bodines is the answer they went with, but Jeff and Brett is also correct. So a lot of you got that one. Eric Banton, you were first on the button on that one. Biff Gregel, you got, actually Charles Peterson Jr., you got the first one to say Jeff and Brett. Excellent. Ooh, here's a good one. Here's a good qualifying question. How many grueling days of time trials were there for the first Southern 500? How many grueling days of time trials were there for the first Southern 500? Yeah, another number question here. That's okay. How many grueling days of time trials were there for the first Southern 500? I'll tell you what, multiple days of qualifying, that sounds exciting to me. I don't know about you. There'd be all kinds of stories you can generate from that, from one day to the next. Who's going to go back out a second time and all that. I would have loved to be there for like the 94 Brickyard when they had all those cars attempting it. I would have just been a kid in the candy store with all those cars turning up there. You want to talk about big fields and big teams entering a race. Real exciting. How many grueling days of time trials were there for the first Southern 500? All right, we got 5, 3, 4, 10, 6, 7. All right, Mark says 9. Let's take a look. The answer is 15. Wow, 2 weeks in a day. How about that? I wouldn't have guessed that. I figured, 4 or 5 maybe for just for qualifying. 15 days of qualifying. I don't know how many hours they did that, but I mean, of course, Darlington's so savage. I mean, imagine a lot of that would have been just kind of working on the cars. And yeah, 15 days. That's insane. I mean, that's like multiple race weekends. Did they do other races in between? That would be kind of weird. Imagine maybe run a backup car. I mean, we're talking 1950. So, I mean, or just run another car at a short track in the meantime. That's a big commitment. And then you got to run the most grueling race that existed at that time, the Southern 500. All right. We'll do one more question here. We'll wrap up for tonight here. All right. Ooh, here we go. This is a good one. What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? Last question for tonight. Yeah, 15 days of qualifying. 15 days of qualifying, and Derek Cope is the Tasmanian Devil. We got some good little factoids here today. What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? Real interesting bit of history on that. 19 race schedule in 1950. That's true, at least for NASCAR sanctioned ones. Of course, I'm sure Big Bill clamped down on who was going to run non-sanctioned competition. At least I imagine that's how he ran it back then. Saints NASCAR fan, thank you for joining in here. just wrapping up here for tonight, but we got our last question for tonight. What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? I think we had a Neil Castle's question for our last question last week, if I remember correctly. So, yeah. What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? We got guesses for Thompson and Bowman Gray, Silverstone, Hickory, Stafford, the Waterford Speed Bowl, Greenville Pickens, Holland Motorsports Complex, North Wilkesboro. These are all good guesses. Greenville, okay. All righty, here we go. Last question of the evening. One more time. What track was the site of Neil Castle's only Grand National East win? The answer is Greenville. Greenville. I think a few of you got that. Greenville. B-Boy 89. I assume it's the same as Greenville Pickens. I would think. By leaving it like that, it leaves it open-ended. Because I think the Grand National East one was they eliminated tracks that were no longer eligible on the Cup circuit and ran their own championship for a couple of years. And I think Greenville Pickens was among those. Well, it seems like they would have qualified, but I don't know. But yeah, B-Boy 89, I'm pretty sure you're right. And Gianni Carlino, looks like you got in right under the line there too. So there we go. All righty. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'm going to let you guys go because it's 4th of July here for many of you out there here, as well as here at Last Car Headquarters. Have a very happy Independence Day, folks, and enjoy the weekend. Stay safe out there, and watch out for the bootleg fireworks, I guess. Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Our next show is going to be after the Atlanta race weekend, next weekend, with pretty grueling race coming up on that weekend as well. Of course, lastcar.info is the website. Patreon.com/lastcaronbrock is the Patreon. At lastcaronbrock is the Twitter for more of my hot takes and poorly aged tweets. And you can check out those as well. So have a great night, everyone, and enjoy the fireworks. We'll see you next week.